Welcome to today's explainer. We're tackling a term you've probably heard thrown around a lot, postmodernism. But hey, we're not going to treat this like some dry, dense academic theory. Instead, we're looking at postmodernism as the actual, practical operating system running today's remixed, hypermediated world. I mean, if you've ever felt like reality is just a copy of a copy, or that original ideas don't even exist anymore, well, you're already living in a postmodern condition. So, let's break down exactly what that means. Okay, let's dive into this. Here is our agenda for today. Number 1, the shift to postmodernism. 2, rejecting the grand narrative. 3, simulation and hyperreality. 4, pastiche and remix culture. And finally, number 5, fluid identity and you. Starting with section 1, the shift to postmodernism, a cultural journey. To truly understand the postmodern world we live in right now, we really have to look at the historical structures it replaced. Because honestly, you can't understand a rebellion if you don't know what they were rebelling against in the first place. So let's look at this cultural timeline. We start way back with the Enlightenment, which was totally dominated by this strong belief in unified meaning, absolute truth, and the idea that human progress was just a straight line heading upwards. But then, in the early 20th century, modernism arrived. Modernism experienced this deep disillusionment. Think about the absolute trauma of the world wars. It realized the world was broken, but it was still desperately searching for order. And then from the 1960s onwards, we hit the postmodern rupture. This is where that search for absolute order just completely broke down and was abandoned entirely. Now, if you take away just one single thing from this explainer, absolutely make it this distinction. Modernism looked at the fragmented world and it mourned the loss of meaning. It was genuinely sad that the pieces were broken. Postmodernism, on the other hand, it looked at those exact same broken pieces and threw a party in the ruins. It literally said, the world is fragmented, and we celebrate it. Postmodern texts accept this fragmentation. There is no hold to recover, and to them, that's not a crisis, it's just the accepted condition of our world. Moving to section 2, rejecting the grand narrative. The end of the one-size-fits-all story. So how exactly did they throw this party? Well, they started by tearing up the rulebook. Let's check out a really revolutionary idea from Jean-Francois Lyotard back in 1979. In his 1979 book, The Postmodern Condition, Lyotard defined postmodernism with this exact, famously dense phrase: incredulity towards metanarratives. Now, that carries a ton of academic weight, but let's translate that jargon into everyday language, right? Incredulity just means extreme skepticism or disbelief. And metanarratives, those are the grand, totalizing stories that a society tells itself to explain how the world works. So, postmodernism is simply the rejection of these one-size-fits-all stories. The crucial point here is understanding exactly which stories they were rejecting. Lyotard argued that grand explanatory systems, things like Marxism, absolute religious dogma, the inevitable upward march of Enlightenment progress, and even humanism, were actually totalizing fictions. They were stories pretending to be absolute truths. And postmodernism discarded these because they were seen as dominant scripts that ultimately suppressed plurality and difference. Basically, if you claim to have the one single answer for all of human history, postmodernism just isn't going to believe you. Which brings us to section 3, simulation and hyperreality explained, when the real disappears. This is perhaps the most fascinating and honestly, slightly unsettling part of our explainer. Because if there is no single truth, what happens to reality? Let's uncover a 1981 concept from theorist Jean Baudrillard that fundamentally changes how we view media. In his work Simulacra and Simulation, Baudrillard introduces us to hyperreality. It's a condition where representations no longer refer to any real original. In our intensely media-saturated culture, signs just simulate other signs. The copy actually comes before the original, and objective reality is completely replaced by this hyper-real state. It's wild to think about. And this brilliantly illustrates exactly how that happens. Let's walk through Baudrillard's 4 steps of descent into hyperreality. Step 1, you have a real original, something that actually exists in the physical world. Step 2, we make a copy of it, like a photograph or a map. But by step 3, we enter postmodernism. Signs are just simulating other signs. We're literally making copies of copies. And finally, step 4, the disappearance of the real. The original is entirely lost or forgotten, and all we're left with is the simulation. We lose touch with actual reality entirely, living instead in a media-constructed mirage. All right, on to section 4, pastiche and remix culture, erasing the boundaries. So, if we live in a world of copies, how does that affect the media we consume every single day? Let's pivot to how these philosophical ideas heavily influence our modern media landscape, specifically looking at how we create and consume texts. Enter the concept of intertextuality, developed by Julia Kristeva. Intertextuality argues that absolutely no text is original. Period. Every text is just a tissue of references, quotations, and echoes of other texts. Meaning isn't produced by comparing a text to the real world, it's produced by relating texts to other texts. Think about it in everyday terms. When you watch a new movie that heavily references a classic 80s film scene, or you see a television commercial that echoes a famous pop culture meme, that is intertextuality in action. Because everything is a reference. Theorists, like Frederick Jameson, noticed a massive shift in how we imitate things. Traditionally, we had parody, satirical imitation with a critical distance. Think of a spoof movie actively making fun of a genre. But postmodernism is dominated by pastiche. Pastiche is blank imitation. It recycles past styles without any satirical intent. So why does pastiche happen? Well, according to Jameson, our culture has exhausted originality. We've run out of new ideas, so we can only blankly recycle the past. And as originality disappears, so do the old social hierarchies of art. Postmodern texts fundamentally collapse the boundaries between high and low culture. It takes elite literary culture and mashes it right up against television, comic books, advertising, and mass media. It incorporates all of these elements equally into serious cultural analysis. In the postmodern view, an advertisement is just as valid a text for analyzing our culture as a piece of classic elite literature. The boundary is completely erased. Which leads us to a rather provocative question. Is history just a fiction? Well, according to postmodernism, and particularly through the work of theorist Hayden White, the boundary between history and fiction is highly questionable. Postmodernism views history not as a transparent record of objective facts, but as a narrative construction. It's a story, and it's shaped by ideology, what details are selected or left out, and the rhetorical choices of the person writing it. Even history is just another text subject to interpretation. Now for section 5. Fluid identity and you, decentering the subject. We've talked about media, history, and truth, but let's bring this philosophy down to the individual level. Let's talk about you and how postmodernism fundamentally shifts our very concept of self. This concept really hits hard, the end of the unified subject. Remember that Enlightenment era we started with? It firmly believed in a rational, autonomous human being with a stable core identity. Well, postmodernism completely dismantles that idea. It argues that there is no stable, essential core identity sitting deep inside of you just waiting to be discovered. Instead, postmodern identity is entirely different. It is fluid, it's constructed, it's often contradictory, and it is culturally produced. Think about how this applies to your own life today. Your online persona on one social media platform might be totally different from your professional persona, which is completely different from how you act at a family dinner, right? You don't have one unified self. You have a constant, shifting construction of identities. You're producing yourself every single day based on the culture around you. And because there's no grand meaning to uncover and no essential core self to find, postmodernism does something very specific. It embraces the surface. Depth, sincerity, and neat resolutions are replaced by playfulness, irony, and self-reflexivity. Meaning is constantly deferred, it's multiplied, and it is never, ever settled. This is exactly why so much of our media uses self-reflexivity and metafiction, where texts literally break the fourth wall and actually acknowledge they're just constructed fictions. It's playing with you, because in this view, play is all there is. Which brings us to our final, slightly unsettling thought. In a world of recycled copies, pastiche, fluid identities, and vanishing absolute truths, what makes you you? If everything is a construction, are you just another text echoing other texts? It's a bit ironic, isn't it? We spent all this time throughout history searching for absolute truth, only to celebrate the fact that it might not exist at all. I hope this explainer has given you a clear, structured lens to look at our very unstructured, postmodern world. Keep questioning the narratives around you, and we'll see you in the next one.